guys, feel free to join us on Twitch. We're on Twitch TV. This is chapter 2, basically, or chapter 1. The Sabbath of the Goat. Let's just read it. Oh, the heart of NOX, NOX, the night of Pan. Pan, duality, energy, death. Death, begetting, the supporters of O. To beget is to die is to beget. Cast the seed into the field of night. Life and death are two names of A. Kill thyself. Neither of these alone is enough. Vocalize much more coherent than people think, right? So it seems like it's just a bunch of lines. There's all these different lines, and they kind of seem to not relate to each other. Like they're saying different things, apparently. But let's read the commentary. It's pretty long in this one. This one's pretty difficult to get through, but it's worth reading through, at least demonstrating how Crowley thought. So it says the shape of the figure I, or 1, suggests the phallus. This chapter is therefore called Sabbath of Goat, the witch's Sabbath, in which the phallus is adored. So already he's talking about chapter 1 being suggestive of a phallus. So in Crowley's mind, a line, an I, a 1, these are all phallic symbols. The Sabbath of the Goat is because Baphomet, A215, the devil, is identified with the erect phallus in all senses. So physically the erect phallus, as well as like the spine, the world axis, anything that represents this, either the tent prop of man of earth and so on. The chapter begins with a repetition of O, referred to in the previous chapter. So O, remember, is Nuit Hadit Rahor Kuit, but also represents the divine ecstasy of the nature of the universe, being that of love. It says it's explained that this triad lives in night, the night of Pan, which is mystically called NOX or NOX, and this O is identified with the O in this word. So this is a great example of like the gobbledygook kablah that Crowley talks about. You have to go very slowly through it, but it's quite simple. So it is explained that this triad lives in night. So this triad is O, right? The triad of Nuit Hadit Rahor Kuit is what he's talking about. You wouldn't know that if you didn't read the previous chapter. So it does actually pay to read this kind of in order. They live in the night of Pan, which is the night of Pan. And the night of Pan is the annihilation of all. Right, so Pan is all. It represents the universe as manifested as a whole. It's Pan. Like you might consider the universe as a single object, a single thing. That is Pan. In order to cross the abyss, the consciousness of that unitary universe is destroyed. It's annihilated. And you were born, poetically speaking, symbolically speaking, into that night of Pan, which is the annihilation of that unified universe. Being born into that night makes one a master of the temple, right? Crossing of the abyss. Nuit Hadit Rahor Kuit live in that night, right? They live in that ground, that infinite potential beyond all manifestation, in the infinite, nameless, unmanifest, whatever you want to call it. That triad lives in the night of Pan. That night of Pan is called NOX, and the triad is identified with the O of that NOX, right? The center letter. N is the tarot symbol death, because Nun is attributed to A213, death. And X, or cross, is the sign of the phallus. So again, the cross is just two lines together. Remember, we already established that Crowley sees this straight line as phallic. The cross is therefore an expanded phallus of sorts. It represents the phallus in manifestation, in balance. Says for a fuller commentary on NOX, see Liber 7, Chapter 1, which is a holy book of Thelemic about the crossing of the abyss. So they're very abstract ideas, they're very weird, but nonetheless Crowley is talking about this above the abyss stuff, trans-abyssal stuff. That night, where everything is annihilated, is considered the night of Pan, or NOX. Then goes on, NOX adds to 210, which symbolizes the reduction of duality to unity and thence to negativity, and is thus a hieroglyph of the great work. What? Well, he's talking about literally the number 210 being 210. It's like a countdown. Duality, unity, nothingness. So NOX is Nun Ayin Sa'adi for whatever reason, and it adds to 210 to create this numerical symbolism to add on top, which is the dissolution of duality into unity and thence to negativity. Right, so it's kind of that process of first the mystic unites all opposites into a single unity, a consciousness of the universe as a single being or as a single object, single thing. And most people think that is the highest attainment of becoming one with everything, but there's actually something beyond that, which is the annihilation of the consciousness of the unified universe. It's kind of like Atma Darshana, the revelation of the unified universe, but that's not it. There's also Shiva Darshana, the opening of the eye of Shiva, which destroys that unified universe. So first you go 2 to 1, and then you go 1 to 0. You're born into the night. That's why Liber Reguli at the very end, you kind of hit the ground and you suckle the babe, the Mater Triumphans, of creating the new child, the new self. But it is not a new self. That would be a misnomer, because the nature of that identity has no attachment, has no identity. It's an identityless identity. That's why when you're born into the night of Pan, you're Nemo, nobody, no man. No one comes out of there alive, so to speak. Alright, so it's not like you just get a new and better ego that's cooler. The ego itself is disidentified from. And so all this commentary, we're literally like on the first line of this chapter still. O, the heart of NOX, the night of Pan. That's all we've gone through so far. So this is why I say Book of Lies is by far the densest book that Crowley ever wrote. Each line has such an insane amount of depth you can go into it, that, you know, it's something you can study for a very long time and see a lot of different connections on and on and on, right? So the next line, Pan, it's actually, you know, pi alpha nu, right? Pan, duality, energy, death. The commentary is the word Pan is then explained. Pi, right? The Greek letter, the letter of Mars, is a hieroglyph of 2 pillars, therefore suggests duality. So you have to look at the physical icon of pi is basically like 2 eyes together, stuck together by a little line on the top. So it represents 2 pillars, therefore duality. It's like these 2 pillars. A, by its shape, is the pentagram, energy. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. If you're on Facebook, you're watching us, feel free to come on to Twitch TV/Thelemic Union, or on YouTube. So A, by its shape, is a pentagram. That's because a capital A forms a pentagram of sorts. Some high-tech stuff, guys, I know. Right, you have A. Wow. Kind of like that. Can you see that? Alright, so the black is the A. Then the red is kind of implied. So Crowley thought that the capital A implied a pentagram in this way. A. You guys can see I'm very good at drawing on paint. I don't want to embarrass you guys too much by showing how skillful I am, but that's the idea. N, by its tarot attribution, is death. So pan is pi, which means duality, A, which means energy, because the pentagram represents energy, and N, which represents death. So that's why it says pan. Duality, energy, death. It's an analysis of, it's a kind of Kabbalistic analysis of the name. Kabbalistic just means like whatever symbolic way we can interpret it that makes sense to me. My book is the Book of Lice. I think you picked up the wrong book, Faye. But hopefully your head is clean. Right, so the next line is death, begetting, the supporters of O. NOX is then further explained, and it's shown that the ultimate trinity, O, is supported or fed by the process of death and begetting, which are the laws of the universe. So you might imagine O, and then there's this kind of death and begetting, and they're the two processes that sustain the universe, the two laws of the universe. I'm gonna have to go back into paint. Alright, so we have O. Right? For those of you who are into OTO, this idea that O, and again, this O is Nuit, Hadit, Rahor, Kui, the 3 and naught, the ultimate naught is sustained by these two laws, begetting and death. So going back to that line, death, begetting, the supporters of O. Therefore, these two laws, death and begetting, death and generation, life and death, whatever, they support O, or they allow O to operate. Then it says to beget is to die is to beget, cast the seed into the field of night. So it says the identity of these two is then explained, right? So death and begetting are actually just two sides of the same coin. Two sides of this same idea. To die is to create new life. And when you have new life, that implies death. So it's this inherent, interconnected process. The student is then charged to understand the spiritual importance of the physical procession in line 5. So when it's talking about lines, you have to count from the paragraph, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cast the seed into the field of night. You might interpret that as like sexual ejaculation, which is death, leads to life. And casting the seed into the field of night. One interpretation of that line. Then says, life and death are two names of A. Kill thyself, neither of these alone is enough. It says, it's then asserted that the ultimate letter A has two names or phases, life and death. This is the same idea that Crowley talks about with IAO, that the A, in one interpretation of this name, is actually I and O create the field of operations for A, the God. So you might even consider I and O to be begetting and death that support O, that allow it to operate. A is a name of the true self, the infinite impersonal self, that which does not die through all deaths, that which goes through various phases of life and death, like the serpent's curve of life and death, and travels through it. So it represents this infinite self, the star, perhaps, the star that enters into these phases of incarnation with different lives. And that life and death are its two weapons, its two phases. Just like begetting and death are the two operations of O. Line 7 balances line 5. It will be noticed that the phraseology of these two lines is so conceived that the one contains the other more than itself. Line 8 emphasizes the importance of performing both. What are line 7 and 5? Well, they are cast the seed into the field of night and kill thyself. Cast the seed into the field of night represents begetting. Kill thyself represents death. So it's just a repetition of this exact idea. Death, begetting. Kill thyself represents also samadhi, right? He talks about die daily later, and he explicitly says this is a reference to practicing samadhi every day. Neither of these alone is enough, so not just mystical attainment and dissolution is needed, but also begetting, creation, generation, putting your life into the world, not simply dissolving, right? So it's solva et coagula, it's not just solve. That's the first half, and then you need the second half. There's a lot of these in Book of Lies where it's like the balance of opposites. He's very, very specifically keen about duality and the transcendence of duality in Book of Lies. It is kind of like the point of the whole text. Which is a good example of how long you can spend on a single chapter to really dig into the meaning of this.